Show, day 14 of the war in Israel. Today we're talking about how Israel behaves in the very difficult, we should acknowledge, diplomatic situation that it's in, how it deals with other countries in the world. I'm joined by Morgan, Marco, and Richard. This topic was something I was watching the news from Israel yesterday, as I do nowadays, and they were talking about Russia. Russia, of course, immediately, I think, called for a ceasefire, pretty much, or like submitted a UN Security Council resolution trying to, have a ceasefire happen before Israel does anything in response to what happened. They've long supported basically pretty much everything bad that happened in the world can somehow trace it back to Russia. And Israel, I'm trying to remember if we did a show on this or we mentioned this on a show. I definitely spoke about it, but I'm not sure if it was on the channel, about how disgraceful Israel's approach to Russia's invasion of Ukraine was. Israel didn't back Ukraine. I think that's what they should have done, even with the diplomatic situation and knowing that Russia is has presence in Syria and so on. Israel tries to be friends with all the horrible countries in the Middle East. Now, it's understandable. You don't want to be at war with everybody all the time, and they're your neighbors. But on the other hand, they are just really bad in terms of how they treat their own people, and in terms of what they actually say and think about Israel. We didn't get much more positive responses from so-called I wouldn't say allies, but countries that Israel has peace with in the Middle East than we did from Russia. Saudi Arabia, I think, immediately, maybe on the day, called off the talks for a potential peace deal, or whatever they want to call it, with Israel. So I think we can discuss the specifically what Israel is doing, and also it's how would you navigate these waters, because it's a very problematic and I think difficult situation. Okay, let's go to Marco and Richard and get your initial thoughts on this.
Gosh, I would definitely navigate these waters very differently. As you said, it's a very difficult situation for everyone, really, for the West and for Israel, but Israel in particular, because it's wedged among those basket cases with whom we are interfering quite heavily. That makes the task even more difficult. When, of course, there's Hezbollah in Lebanon, which is effectively Lebanon and Syria as well. They're kind of located in the area, and of course the Russia is supporting the Syrian government, and every time Israel wants to preempt Hezbollah from doing something stupid, needs to bomb some strategic locations, which has to probably have to be clear with Russia, because otherwise they will get all uppity about it. So this whole appeasement and this whole dealing and under-table dealing is kind of built in the situation. What really gets to me, that we allow dictatorships like Russia and China to even be seen to take a moral high ground. They manage to exploit the West's weakness, and they manage to sound like the risible guys who then are seen as legitimately sitting around the table. And this is one of the worst thing you could actually, if you wanted to create a bad situation, this is it.
Yeah, but I think a lot of what you're seeing is the effect of when pragmatism meets dictators, and the first thing to settle down the river are your own principles, and you end up in the moral greyness that you object to when it's referred to your own country, that's definitely difficult. And also the fact that the enemy of your enemy is your Brutus of tomorrow. And when looking into all the deal making between different countries and the stages at which peace deals were at, and the conversations between Saudi Arabia and the US and Israel and the various different triangles of countries that you can study, all of that seems to be almost academic now. The last 14 days have swept all that utterly away. So it's almost irrelevant to analyze that in too much detail, because the situation's changed too much. We're now in a totally different phase. All of the diplomacy that led up to this point, people have torn up, whether officially or otherwise, their own positions that they had up until a fortnight ago. And we got to move from where we're at now. And that leaves a very different starting point.
Morgan, your thoughts on this?
It's extraordinary to me that Israel didn't condemn the invasion of Ukraine. I didn't actually know that until we were planning the episode today, because there's obviously something incredibly comparable between Israel's situation and Ukraine's. Israel isn't facing a superior enemy in the sense of a larger country which has got a larger military that's possibly going to win, but in the sense that it is the victim of military aggression. It would seem obvious, at least the comparison to me would seem obvious, that they should be backing up Ukraine. And seeing the response that there was when I was looking it up for the show was incredibly disappointing. The attempt to be neutral and to tread neutral ground when Israel is a country which there is no neutral ground. It has to walk a very definite side of the fence. So that's extraordinary. And there's a sense in which I don't want to be too harsh on Israel. I mean, I do on the one hand, but in the sense that it's not solely Israel's problem. It seems like every Western nation has a deep confusion over what its interests are in regards to foreign policy for however many decades now. Who are our allies? How should we treat them? How should we act in the long term? It seems to be something that either isn't understood at all within the halls of power. I think I'd love to be on the inside of the Israeli government and see how they think about these things and how they've made that decision that they should they should tread very lightly around Ukraine. So either it's not understood or it is understood and the pressure just gets to them and they kind of crack. I don't know. So Israel's diplomatic situation is another example of something which has just been continuing for a long, long time, which is short-term thinking, a poor understanding of what our interests are, and everything else that we've said on the show in the recent weeks about Israel's policy being bad. So I agree with what Richard said very much. So those are my initial thoughts.
Yeah, by the way, even after Russia made its statements, there was a phone call between Netanyahu and Putin, which that alone, I don't know, I'm assuming nobody in the West takes phone calls from Putin, but Netanyahu decided to do that. Before we get back, I want to, first of all, I want to thank Jonathan Honig for the super chat. I also do the news updates at the beginning of the Daily Objective, but there are a couple of things that I want to update on. So one thing I forgot to mention, I don't know how important this is, but in the stuff that's going on in the north, at some point there were reports today that Israeli fighter jets were seen in over Beirut, which is it's unusual because Hezbollah is in the south of Lebanon. Of course, their leadership is in Beirut, so there's a reason to be there with fighter jets, although not just for the view. Like something should actually be done there, and nothing was. And also, there's just news that I saw just now that Hamas has said and Israel has confirmed that Hamas is going to release two of the hostages, a mother and her daughter, who have dual citizenship, Israeli and American. And Hamas says it's for humanitarian reasons. So, of course, this is it's great that two of the hostages will no longer be held by these animals, but of course, it is used by them and by their allies in Western media and elsewhere in the West for pro-Hamas propaganda. Look how nice they are. They, slaughtered a bunch of people, took a bunch of people hostages, and now they're releasing two of them. All right. So back to diplomacy. Back in like 2017. I was working on, maybe 2018. I was working on setting up ARCUK and making it a thing, hoping to do stuff with it and get support, both financial and other. I remember speaking to somebody who was kind of higher up within the movement at the time, and he said to me, I've heard you were doing great things there in London, but you're not very diplomatic. And I remember, so I didn't say this at the time, but I was thinking, I take that as a compliment, because I was trying to think, what does diplomatic mean? It means basically not saying what you really think so that you can get something out of somebody who you'd rather not deal with at all. That's my off the cuff definition. I'm not sure that's put that in a dictionary, but diplomacy is it's not a field that I would want to enter, even if I was told I can, because the kind of stuff you have to deal with. I mean, imagine being Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, where every country has a equal vote in the General Assembly. Most countries are dictatorships. Almost all of them hate Israel. And you have to beg them for whatever their vote is going to be. Not to mention the UN Security Council, which has 5 permanent members, among them Russia and China, and luckily every country has a veto. So we have the United States there to veto things. But Marco, Richard, any thoughts on diplomacy in general? Is it a virtue?
A virtue. I mean, Morgan was saying that they is surprised that Israel didn't condemn the attack on Russia. Well, why should it be a surprise? I mean, just look at what Raz just said about Hamas. They're playing them like a fiddle. They're now pretending to be the good guys. They're showing to everyone, look at us, we're responsible people. We are reasonable. You can talk to us. We can come to an understanding. After they slaughtered, nearly 2,000 people, including kids. I mean, Israel doesn't even have a plan in the back pocket to flatten down Gaza. I mean, that's not an out of the blue event, is it? How is it possible that they don't even have a plan to roll out, even as the very last option? Not even that is ready. So that goes to show that they were never really serious about anything. They were always hoping to fudge whatever event was happening, and even the excuse that they've recruited so many people, they haven't got the equipment. Perhaps it's true. Yeah, I'm happy to believe that. But the fact that you didn't have a plan in the first place to react quickly in an event like this means that you were never prepared to actually do it in the first place. And waiting for keep telling the international community, I'm going in, look at me, I'm going in, I'm being serious this time. Come on, somebody come here and stop me, please. Somebody tell me to be reasonable. And then at the first chance that they go in and start swapping prisoners and appeasement that they've done for the last 8 years.
I think some of the interesting background reading to this, I hadn't appreciated that some of these deal making that was going on, some of these attempts at diplomacy, are at least in part from the US's point of view to help Biden's re-election, to try and give him an overseas win, even if it lasts 10 minutes, lasts to get him over the line and another term of office. And that's one of the problems with diplomacy, is all the different agendas of the parties involved in any diplomatic setting, where you're trying to keep everybody happy whilst situations contradict each other. So you're trying to horse trade over things that are important. Yeah, economic situation is always plays a part in it. I mean, you've only got to look at how the EU struggled to deal with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and how things like sanctions and companies not trading with Russia, lots of the announcements that were made about different countries in Europe not trading with Russia were always put way down the line. Sort of 12, in 12 months, we'll be implementing it. We make the announcement today, so it sounds like we're on the side of Ukraine, but we've got it such the long grass. We hope the whole war will be over before we have to implement such a decision, and we won't have to withdraw our factories. And that's in the most simple situation. And when you translate that across to the complex powder keg that is the Middle East, with all its history and conflicts between different sects, between all the different Arab countries, within each other as well. I mean, that was one of the things that I drew most out of the episode, the recent TDO that you did, Razi, with Ayman on why the Muslims hate the Jews, was the fact that lots of the Arab countries are equally antagonistic towards other Arab countries, whereas the impression you're given here from the UK, particularly by the crowds in the streets, that it's one Muslim brotherhood, and I use that term to mean, we're all holding the same flag, not that we're part of the same party, and that couldn't be further from the truth when it comes to the actual regional area.
And the amount of stuff we actually don't know about, like, for example, before the Hamas attack, there was this, the US was trying to broker a deal between Israel and the Saudis. And part of the terms is giving nuclear capability to the Saudi, even for civilian use. Are you mad? Are you gonna give enrichment capability to the Middle East? That's just, I mean, tell me about not creating a worse future. All this kind of stuff, which hopefully has been derailed, but I don't know. As Richard said, it's also part of making up for what Trump did. Trump was the first one who was pushing for a country-to-country deal with Israel, rather than the previous theory was every Arab country will do a deal, a single deal with Israel. And of course, because Trump managed to get a few countries aboard, Morocco, Sudan, Bahrain, I think somebody else, and the UAE, Biden needs to be seen to do the same. And, in the process, giving away a bit of uranium to some wacko who's already killed somebody, a journalist, Khashoggi. I mean, let's not forget about that one. How can you deal with a guy who's actually responsible for killing a journalist in an embassy in a different country? I mean, come on.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of repeats, the things that the West has done in the past that you hear people criticize the West for, and rightfully so. Although I don't think most of the critics are coming from a good place. But we talk about how the U.S. supported Islamists in different places because they fought against the Soviets, and how Israel thought Hamas would fight against the PLO, which was much stronger at the time. And we're doing the same thing. Yeah, if you're gonna give Saudi Arabia nuclear capabilities in exchange for saying, yeah, okay, the Jews can live, for now, we're okay with that, and letting people with an Israeli passport visit Riyadh. Yeah, that's what I want to. That's where I want to go on vacation. Yeah, it's sad, and it's we talk about how sentiments are changing in Israel, but they're changing particularly for like this cause. I don't think they're changing overall, and certainly around the world they're not changing enough. And yeah, anyway. Roland with a super chat, thank you for that. He says, how do I put this diplomatically? Fuck diplomacy. I'm guessing that's what all these different characters were supposed to say. Yeah, Morgan, you're not just an on-screen talent at ARCUK, you're also behind the scenes staff, and we're constantly talking about what we can add to the different membership levels to encourage people to buy a membership or to upgrade. And we have some stuff that's already there, some stuff that's coming up. Do you think we should offer a course in diplomacy as well, taught by me?
Yeah, well, not by me either. Something I'm quite bad at, but trying to get better. Just before I get to that, just off a couple of things you mentioned. I don't know if you mentioned this earlier, but it was in the news today that I think it's 20 of the hostages or something like that, under 18 or something, it's come out, so are children. And since you mentioned the hostages, it reminded me of something that came out, I think, in the first few days of the war, where some representative for Hamas promised that the hostages would be treated very humanely, or humanitarianly, something like that, as if it's not an unhumane thing to do in the first place to take hostages. It was just amazingly ridiculous thing, where they were posing as if they were this professional kind of civilized organization who has just taken hostages. So that just reminded me of that. As for diplomacy, when I was a kid, I kind of wanted to be a diplomat, I think. I read a lot of spy novels, and it seemed like a kind of sexy job to have. I don't know if you guys watched The Night Manager, which came out a few years ago, the TV show, but like it was kind of, I had this kind of golden age of empire, British diplomat kind of idea in my mind. And I'm very, very glad. And my dad kind of encouraged me in this. I think he thought that would be cool for his son to be a diplomat. I'm really glad that that's not the road I've gone down. I have some friends who are diplomats, actually. And, you know, they're tremendous people in the sense that they have a lot of patience, and they put up with a lot, and it's not an easy job. But the idea that you're going to get posted to some, in all likelihood, to some awful country somewhere and have to put up with irrational people making irrational demands, and you're going to have to make some kind of concession to appease them, and so much of your job is going to involve posturing and trying to appear good or trying to appear dominant in some way. Yeah, that doesn't seem good to me. I think diplomacy has a place in everyday life, in the sense that I think you can meet perfectly rational people and kind of they can get the wrong end of the stick, or you can kind of butt heads with them in some way, and you can be diplomatic about dealing with them. And you realize they're not a bad person, they're just a bit tricky. But in terms of, and of course nations have a need for diplomacy, but diplomacy with clear enemies, I think, is a real error. And it's something that we do all too often, is we are too diplomatic with our enemies. As I think after the invasion of Russia, we took our diplomats, the UK took our diplomats back from Russia, as I remember. I don't think they've sent them back, so far as I'm aware. But why were they not taken away after the Salisbury poisonings in 2018, for example, or after, is it Shripal? What's his name? The guy, or whoever was poisoned in hospital. I'm forgetting his name, in Britain. Like, when Russia is blatantly launching assassination attempts in your own country, why is this not acted upon very firmly? So it seems like a lot of what modern diplomacy consists of is allowing foreign hostile nations to take extraordinary measures and to try and do as little as possible to rock the apple cart. So that's my view of diplomacy, and the UN, I think, exemplifies that kind of ethos par excellence.
Yeah, I don't know, you know, we've said about protesters, like if they're young, you know, when you're young, you can get away with anything. So yeah, when you were young, you know, if you thought being a diplomat was exciting, you know, we'll let you get away with that. I don't know how. It's only exciting to be a diplomat if you're like a, you know, the ambassador to Qatar by day and then killing terrorists by night, you know, as a Mossad agent or something. That would definitely be exciting. But yeah, you know, when we did, I will say that Mary Aline sent a super chat saying, excellent, knowledgeable, articulate discussion. Thank you for that. And also, would you post a link to the TDO with Ayn and Razi? Yeah, Daniel, if you can post that. And in that context, I was going to say, you know, when Ayn was here, so I have this like office chair, but I have one of them in my office, and we needed to get another one. We got one from the common area here, and it's different heights. So, you know, I tried to like put this chair lower, and I was telling him about this this time that Israel had some disagreement with Turkey over something, and they brought like the Turkish ambassador for a photo op, and they gave him a lower chair, like to sort of humiliate him. And this is the kind of thing that you know, you think about when you're a diplomat. This is what you have to come up with. Like, we're put him on a lower chair to kind of reprimand him in photo form.
I don't know if you ever saw it, but there was an amazing example where when Angela Merkel went to go meet Vladimir Putin, she's terrified of dogs. So when they, they go and sit in a room somewhere where they have chairs which kind of face the cameras, but it looks, and they chat in front of the fireplace for a second. He brought in his massive sort of mastiffs for a moment to meet her, as if to say, come meet my lovely dogs. And of course, it terrified the living daylights out of her. And that's just seems so much of what diplomacy is, doing these little things to just throw your opponent off guard, so you can posture and try and get what you want. So I take a very dim view of that.
And that's why on EU conferences, they always work right through the night into the small hours until somebody somewhere cracks and wants to go to bed, and therefore, surrenders a chunk of their country's agenda for the purposes of a night's sleep.
Yeah, that's how Margaret Thatcher got a few billions out of as a rebate of what we used to pay for them, because she literally warned them out. She wouldn't leave the room until they said yes, and they did.
I think one of the things that's useful to consider is that not all diplomats are politicians. I mean, for example, I was hearing about Sir Terry Waite the other day, the former envoy of the Archbishop of Canterbury. He's now Sir Terry Waite. These days, if you have Sir in front of your name, you tend to go down in my estimation rather than up. But he was in captivity for about 1,700 days in the Middle East when he went over there for diplomatic reasons on behalf of the Archbishop of Canterbury. And he was eventually released after, as I say, 1,700 days. He was speaking about this crisis and about the hostage taking that's going on at the moment. And he was it's as if he'd learned absolutely nothing. It was pure altruism. It was pure moral equivalency. It's just staggering to believe that you could go through such an experience and not reappraise your attitude to the world. But that's how it is with some people.
If you want to know how diplomacy actually works especially in the British government, there is an old series from the 80s called Yes Minister, Yes Prime Minister. People think it's a comedy, but it's exactly how things work in the civil service. If you had the luck to work in the civil service, you actually would realize that's exactly it.
Yeah, I've never seen that in full, but whenever I see a clip of it posted in the context of something, and around Brexit, there was quite a lot of that. I was thinking, wow, this is very much sounds like it could be footage from an actual meeting that's taking place. And yeah, there was another series, a more recent one, I forget, but with a really sweary advisor.
Thick of it, yeah.
Yeah. Which I don't know if that's how it works, but that was also quite entertaining.
Well, they used to get the ideas for the episodes from listening to a conversation from the drivers of the various ministers, because they would be privy to private conversation and this kind of phone calls, so they knew exactly what's going on, PAs and drivers.
Yeah, I had some friends who worked in Parliament who attest that the thick of it is what it's like. I had a friend who worked in the Conservative media office the day that Chris Whitty resigned during COVID, and apparently it was a very sweary day. And there's a great interview with the guy who made the thick of it, called Armando Iannucci, with Alistair Campbell, who is the model of the Malcolm Tucker character who does a lot of swearing. And there's this great moment in the TV show where he's on 2 phone calls at once and he's swearing at both of them. And he needs to put them in context. So he puts the phones together so they can hear, and he continues swearing at them. And Armando Iannucci asked Alistair Campbell, because he'd heard this story, presumably from a driver or something. He asked Alistair Campbell if he's ever done that. And Alistair Campbell looked a bit uncomfortable and sort of begrudgingly said, well, yes, hasn't everyone done that? When no, I don't think everyone has done that. But yeah, I recommend everyone watch the thick of it.
So Mary Lean says in a super chat, did I read this? That she said Litvinenko was the person whose name was poisoned. We have a super chat from Apollo Zeus. We have a super chat from Lex Friedman, who says, not sure how I ended up here, but I'm enjoying this conversation on diplomacy. Thank you. We'd love to have you join us in a future conversation. This show is every weekday. We talk about a variety of topics, although at the moment we talk about one topic from a variety of angles, which is the war in Israel. So one thing I was thinking when in the context of of Israel's approach to bad countries and bad actors around the world is how I've seen some great clips of, particularly of Naftali Bennett, who was Israel's prime minister for like a weekend recently, more like a year, but felt like a weekend, a long weekend. So he's been relatively good in his appearances on foreign media. He's put some so-called journalists in their place for how they report. But one thing he says is, it's not both sides. There's not, you're talking about both sides, and it's not that there's two sides here that you should listen to equally. That is very true. But Israel complaining about that now is problematic when they're treating other countries that way, and especially Ukraine. And yeah, I mean, once again, I go back to the question of navigating this kind of a landscape, and this is not just if you're Richard, was it you who said not all diplomats are politicians? But all politicians, if they reach a position of power, if they're leaders of their countries, have to be diplomats in some sense, and Israel would have paid a diplomatic price if it had gone, immediately expressed full support for Ukraine. It's a small country in that region. Now, again, I think they should have done that. They should have paid the price. Just like I think now they should destroy their enemy, knowing they're going to pay a price diplomatically and possibly, financially with sanctions. But yeah, I mean, I go back to the question of what do you do in such a situation? How do you navigate it?
Well, there was, sorry, go on, Mark. So there was an interesting article in The Spectator. I can't remember, I want to say it was by Douglas Murray, but I'm forgetting who it was by, which was talking about how in the West, everybody knows from their history classes that appeasement is a terrible policy, that appeasement is the policy that led to Western nations placating Hitler. Why didn't the West get involved when Hitler went into the Rhineland? Why didn't they get involved when Hitler took the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia? Everybody knows from that appeasement is the policy which leads to your own interests being crushed. And yet, if you look at what our leaders do, appeasement is typically the policy. They might say some things that are kind of nominally against appeasement. And I the other day when I was on, I said that there's something very important about moral stances, about saying something when it counts. And there's something true about that, but you do have to back it up with actions. And unfortunately, looking at Israel's response to Ukraine, although initially they kind of condemned it, they then walked it back, and then they didn't do very much about it. And actually, what was pretty good about the Western world's response to the invasion of Ukraine was that broadly things were done. Probably not enough, but at least something was done. Pressure was put on companies to withdraw from Russia and so on. So I think that was pretty good. But there's a way in which I think we have to take a very hard look at ourselves and say, what is appeasement? What does it consist of? And where are we enacting that? And everyone knows in their personal lives that appeasement doesn't work. So why is it on the international stage that we seem to implicitly think it works, even if consciously we say that we don't think it does at all? So, well, anyway, there you go.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, I mean, how can you condemn Israel for taking 4 days in order to condemn that particular invasion when the EU is still the biggest purchaser of liquefied gas from Russia? I mean, come on, let's look at the action. Yeah, it took them 4 days, but on the other hand, as Raza said, they're a small country. They have lots of things to work out before they actually open their mouth, because they're going to get a wallop from one side or the other. And the EU can afford to actually act totally against its own talk, its own regulation, its own diplomacy. So, as you said, Morgan, the only way you should deal with your enemies diplomatically is to tell them clearly, you as much as move an inch towards my interest, as much as they come out of place that you're causing me, you're going to be whacked. We're going to start destroying your infrastructure. Even if you stuff them with kittens and puppies, I don't care. You're going to be flattened. And then if they do it, actually attack them and do exactly what you said. That's the only way that these guys will actually ever gonna respect you.
And further to what you were saying, Morgan, I think there's a big disconnect when people are analysing history and looking at Chamberlain and what led up to the Second World War, and they're focused on the concretes and the specifics of the past without being able to extrapolate the essentials and the principles from that. And therefore to apply them to future situations. They're too ready to go, that was the answer to that situation, another answer to this one is required here. And that pragmatism is so in deep, that critical thinking is so lost within the educational system and within the culture of today, that it does affect people's ability to analyze any situation. I think the difficulty at the moment is that trading away your principles for your security is one of the hardest judgments to make. And that's obviously what Israel is doing when it's surrounded by so many enemies. And even when it's being asked to comment on or react to conflicts outside of its immediate vicinity, such as Russia, Ukraine, it's still got an eye to all of the impacts within its immediate area. So tricky in the extreme.
Yeah, the other day, Yaron made the point that a politician just acts on a 4 to 7 years basis. So as long as they kick the can down the road, their job is done, so they don't really care about consequences. You want to give rich uranium to Saudi Arabia? Oh, that's fine, it's going to give me this deal so I get elected again. But who cares if 10, 20 years down the line, they start making dirty bombs or whatever? We'll think about it.
Yeah, I was also going to mention Yaron's talk here in London a couple of days ago, which, again, it will be on our channel in some form at some point, but it will take a while. But one thing he said, we were talking about Netanyahu, and he said what I think we've said on this channel as well, which is the only hope we have is the fact that Netanyahu knows his political career is over and maybe he will decide to act decisively. Netanyahu is in an interesting position at the moment because it could be that he's delusional enough or knows something that we don't, that he thinks there's a way he can survive this, survive the catastrophe that happened on October 7th under his watch. But again, the people in Israel are so united in terms of at least that Hamas has to be eliminated, and people are annoyed in Israel at the thought of protecting lives in Gaza, knowing that what that means is sacrificing lives of Israelis. One particular moment for me was watching Israeli television, and this guy Yariv Oppenheimer, need to know Israeli politics to know who that is, but he's he is the chairman of an organization in Hebrew. They're called Shalom Achshav. The literal translation is peace now, but I like to translate to peace in our time because I think it's more appropriate to how these people think. And he said we need to crush Hamas. So again, crushing Hamas will cost Netanyahu diplomatically in terms of his relations with leaders of other countries and so on. Not crushing Hamas will guarantee, if it's not already guaranteed, the end of his political career. I don't know. I can say actually what Yaron said. Yeah, he said that Netanyahu is spineless or something to that effect, and it's very difficult. I would think it's difficult with a spine to figure out what to do in such a situation. So it'll be interesting, and it's a bit scary to think what Netanyahu might do. Thank you, Mary Aline, for 2 more super chats, and thank you, Mark. He says thanks to Razi and everyone at ARCUK for the constant stream of great content during this crisis. Thank you. Thanks for watching. And of course, as always, if you think it's valuable and would be valuable to others, please share it and like and subscribe and all that stuff. Well, I don't know if I don't think Mark will object if I speak ill of his prime minister, who today or yesterday Trudeau said something about, we need to have a Palestinian state for something future. So, yeah, I mean, we know that the position of countries around the world hasn't changed on this, but it's also, you need to choose when you say things. Of course, you need to rethink things when reality tells you that you were wrong all along, and maybe they shouldn't support a two-state solution. But just saying this at this point is saying that you are siding, in essence, with the people who did this, or the people who stood by and watched it being done.
Hang on, does it mean we need a Palestinian state in Canada?
Well, I hope he suggests that, because I think there's an election coming up in Canada, and wouldn't mind seeing him in the same unemployment line as all those people we talked about on the Daily Objective who are tearing down posters of hostages and being named and shamed and fired from their jobs. But yeah. Any final thoughts on the topic of diplomacy, on how it's done, on how it should be done?
I think one of the aspects that I find particularly tricky to watch is you're seeing all these leaders go to the Middle East, shake the hand of one person, and then within half a day or even less time, they're in a neighboring country shaking the hand of the complete enemy of that person. And I don't know how you manage to remember what your talking points are, even for which one to say what to. And that's the problem with diplomacy, is you've got a set list where you're going to give one set to one party and one set to another. Now, politicians are well versed in doing that, so they do that at home all the time. But I don't know how that doesn't corrode your soul.
It would be fairly easy if you actually acted on principles rather than on compromising and pragmatism.
So I think a lot of what we've basically said around diplomacy has come back to kind of two things, which are in a way the same thing, which is a refusal to think in the long term and a refusal to think on principle. What is wrong with so much of the diplomacy that Western nations engage in is that it's too much focused on gaining what is perceived to be short-term victories in some, giving up something here to gain something here, and yet actually all you've gained is maybe 3 yards when you've conceded a mile in the long term. And culturally, it's a very good question. Why is it that culturally we seem to be turning against thinking in the long term and thinking in principles? But in the realm of foreign policy, it would be interesting for someone to do the work of measuring how much damage someone like Henry Kissinger has had and in spreading the ideas of, is it realpolitik, which all I can see is on principle, giving up principles. So that's all I can see that it is. And Rand is very useful, I think, in what principles are. It's a recognition that something is true across contexts. And so if it's true in this context, it's going to be true in the other one as well. And there was an interesting example of this on the news where a Sky News journalist was interviewing a member of the Israeli government who had previously been the diplomat to the UK. And this guy is worth his weight in gold to Israel, as far as I can see. He's doing some excellent appearances in the media, defending Israel's right to defend itself, defending its actions. And this journalist was really trying to press him around the bombing of the hospital that happened, and basically opened the interview without even saying really hello to him. She just said, "Was it you?" So she was really trying to be aggressive and hard-hitting in a kind of cringy way. And she was really trying to press him on civilian deaths. And he said, look, when the British and the Americans were destroying ISIS, it's a terrible thing if civilians got caught up in that, but that is the fault of ISIS, and you wouldn't have laid the blame at the feet of Britain for taking actions to defend itself. And he kept putting pressure on that point of, you wouldn't have done it in the case of Britain. And the journalist was stumped because she realized, oh yes, that's true. Although I'm blaming Israel in the case of Britain, I wouldn't do that. And if she were thinking in principle, she'd recognize across those two contexts, it's true that she wouldn't be blaming the victim of the aggression. So that was an interesting illustration of that, which I'm trying to show that clip to as many people as possible, because she kind of gets stumped for 20 seconds and doesn't say a word. It's a fantastic clip. But I think we need to just put a lot of pressure onto politicians to act in a principled way.
Yeah, I just remembered reading a few times in different articles the phrase, the countries wait for diplomacy to unfold. Like diplomacy is this kind of thing that grows out of the ground and comes from the sky. this assumption that this is how we do things, there's no other way, and compromise will come from somewhere. It's like the assumption that compromise will come.
It's either that or a preference for delay and waiting and hoping that the answer will just roll in on the wind down the line.
Morgan, that interview you just mentioned is all the more reason why I can't be a diplomat. If somebody interviewed me and first thing they ask after the facts are known is, was it you? I would probably answer with the words that we try to avoid on this channel to keep it family friendly at best, or I would say no, it was you, or something like that. Yeah, it would piss me off. Something else that pissed me off, which is an answer to our super chat from Apollo Zeus, who asks, how far will this crisis spread and in what form? So something else I forgot to mention in our news updates was that there were some rockets fired from Yemen probably at Israel yesterday, and were shot down by the US. Iran has said that if there's a ground operation in Gaza, they will get involved. Yaron said on Wednesday in our event that maybe the best thing that can happen for Israel is for Iran to get involved, because then America will have to get involved, and then you would actually have to have something that changes the Middle East, if not permanently, then for many, many years to come. Yeah, I don't know. That is that's something that we will find out. I still think that what Hezbollah is doing in the north is not the end game for them here. I think they are waiting for Israel to be kind of tied down with what they're going to do in Gaza, and then they'll do their thing. There are more troops on the northern border in Israel than there have ever been before, more than in the previous war with Hezbollah in 2006. But yeah, this conflict could spread. I think in some cases it is not going to be a bad thing if it does, because this enemy has to be dealt with, and it's better if they're dealt with now when they have whatever it is they have now. It would have been better if they were dealt with decades ago, but better now than when they have nukes and whatever other capabilities. Yeah, I'm thinking, is this the episode where we finally have some positive way to end it? But I don't have any. If you guys have something, please go ahead. If not, yeah, Morgan, you said you like.
Well, I was going to say no, because I really don't like how pessimistic I'm coming across recently when we're talking about things. But if the conflict were to spread, I can't see that turning out well. That might be the best thing ultimately, but if you think about previous Western interventions in the Middle East, how poorly that has turned out. If you think about Afghanistan, that's just turned out tremendously poorly. About how the intervention in Libya has turned out. If you think about how it's affected our own perception of ourselves for the genuine mistakes that were made, or for things said by people like Tony Blair, the way in which bad actors within our own culture are able to make leverage of that and then undermine our own sense of confidence. I just can't see it turning out well. Now, it might, like I said, it might be the thing that needs to happen, and it might in the very long term be the best thing, but it's something that either way, whether the conflict spreads and it remains localized to where it is at the moment, or whether it were to spread out to other nations and it were to radically change the landscape in the Middle East, it's something which I think we're all going to be paying for in the short term.
One difference between if the U.S. intervenes now and past interventions is that in the past, the U.S. was always siding with some bad guys against some supposedly worse guys, whereas here they're actually going to be siding with the only good guys in the Middle East. So that's something to be somewhat optimistic about. Of course, they will do that from their bases in Iran, in Qatar and Saudi Arabia, whatever other despicable countries the West sees as allies. So it's not going to be all good, but it's going to be, I think, better in terms of you have an actual ally, Western ally, Western in terms of Western values in the Middle East.
And I think one thing we can be positive about is the fact that objectivism gives us the tools for interpreting this crisis. And if you didn't have that clarity of thought, then you could be conflicted, you could be guilt-ridden, you could be a mess inside, and that can affect your self-esteem as you're suppressing elements of what you really think in order to comply with another group or whatever in a different situation. I think it's clear when you've got your principles sorted that you know how to interpret anything, and that at least even in a tricky situation like this gives you the comfort of understanding properly what you're looking at rather than being confused about it.
And another good point, selfishly, is that here in the West, especially in London, we have put the spotlight on the snakes that are hiding in the grass, and also the stupid people who support these kind of atrocities, whether knowingly or unknowingly, mostly knowingly. So it's good that the general population is aware that this stuff is going on, these people are around. So it might help us to, at least be warned about and be ready to fight back if it's the case. And as you said, from the bases in Qatar and Saudi Arabia, at least the missiles will be halal.
Well, I do agree. I am proud of what we've been doing these past couple of weeks, and I repeat my call to anybody who agrees to share our content. One way to share our content for anybody who might have a shorter attention span than wanting to watch an hour-long or a 30-minute-long show is our other channel, which is smaller but growing, the Briefly Objective. Of course, subscribe to that. And yeah, there have been videos almost daily over the past couple of weeks. There is one coming up in less than 7 minutes, The True Face of the Left. That is Nikos and me talking about the left and not necessarily agreeing completely, but it's yeah, so it's then that is not a long clip, so it's something like 4 minutes, I think. So easily shareable and consumable. 3 minutes, Daniel says, so that's even better for anybody with a particularly short attention span. Thank you again, Marco and Richard, for all the work you've been doing on that channel, which is pretty much the whole thing. Yeah, thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks Marco, Richard, Morgan for joining me. We will be back here. We'll be back with the reality show on Monday at 6 p.m. UK time. We'll be back with the Daily Objective tomorrow at our normally scheduled time of 5:30 p.m. UK time. On Sunday, we'll be here at 6. Mary Aline with a last minute super chat says, I love it when Nikos and Razi disagree. Well, luckily we do that often. So yeah, and now it is in short clip form. So thanks. We'll see you all tomorrow. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.